Thank you, Rodrigo. It's always a bit of a challenge to be the speaker right after lunch because everybody's probably ready for their nap right now. But since you're wearing headphones, you have to think a little harder, since I unfortunately don't speak Portuguese. But I'm really thrilled to be here in your beautiful country and to have an opportunity to share some ideas of some successful programs and a few maybe not so successful. We're still learning up in California and the US on how to deal with some of our water challenges. As many of you know, water scarcity and drought is an ongoing problem. It moves around not just the US, but your own country and the world, depending on a host of environmental factors. But the one thing that is becoming extremely clear is that climate change is making the situation far more volatile and in many cases far worse. You'll note California right now, as you may have heard in the news, is well into its fourth, almost fifth year of extreme drought. We have over 200,000 acres, about 100,000 hectares of land fallowed, almost 300,000 farm workers without jobs, and they are not then able to feed their families or pay money in the local stores, and our small rural communities are suffering greatly. It's a major issue we're trying to deal with. In many ways, I was asked to talk about governance, so I'm going to do that in one or two slides and then get into actually on the ground work. But it was interesting in some of my research preparing for coming down here, just how similar US and Brazilian water law actually is at this point. That is fairly recent. Brazil did quite a serious change in its water law in the Constitution in 1988. But at this point, they're very similar in that both the US and Brazil are enacting more and more regulatory schemes to try to deal with less water, more people, more agriculture, more demands, and climate change, and how do we find a solution to make all of that work. Despite the similarities, there's still a few differences. We still in the US have quite a few property rights that are often the subject of legal cases every single year. Some of you may have heard a very famous saying by one of our well-known authors, Mark Twain, over 100 years ago, who said that whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting. And believe me, in the US, that is very, very true even now. However, now that I've given you that little legal lesson, I would encourage you to, oh, it's not showing up. Well, when you get the slides online, hopefully that little picture will show up, because it's an article that I have the website right there of an article that actually does quite a good in-depth job of comparing the US and Brazil water legal systems and what their opportunities are to learn from each other. So I'm going to be done with that, because at this point I want to move more into talk about governance from a more management, implementation, applied focus. This came about because a group of us, myself and many others in California, realized about 5 years ago that if we left water management up to the lawyers and the legislators, we were never going to find a solution, because that's just really not what they're looking for. Instead, what we did is we pulled together the California Roundtable on Water and Food Supply. And this is a very special group. We went out and we pulled together senior representatives from agriculture, from environmental groups, from federal government, state government, local government, from the water agencies, from the private sector, from a whole host of people, including some technical expertise. So it's a mix of policy and technical and some leadership. And we have very strict rules concerning confidentiality. When we meet, all the talks that happen in that room cannot leave that room. And it really gives people a chance to sometimes get a little angry with each other, but really lay the issues on the table and work through them and learn from each other as we try to move forward. I'm going to refer to the 3 or 4 reports we've published in just the last couple years, and all of them can be found at this website right here. So the next several reports I mentioned to you, you can find them here. The first one that we did was fairly obvious. It's about stewardship, conservation. How could we be more efficient with agricultural water? And that's what this first report does. And it just really gets into details that, frankly, at this point, I don't think are particularly new information for most of you. Things like drip irrigation and efficiencies. Most of the speakers this morning covered that. But what was interesting when we got to looking on how to implement some of those is we actually found some very valuable lesson from our cities, who were implementing water conservation. So for example, our EPA has several reports here that advise folks in cities and urban areas how to reduce their water use. And they've had phenomenal success with that. In fact, in the years between 2006 and 2012, they saved enough water through implementation of those practices to provide the states of Colorado and Arizona with all the water all their people needed for a year. So what we did was then try to say, okay, how can we start advancing beyond just drip irrigation? Everybody knows that's really good. But there's a lot of other technologies out there. You've heard some of them mentioned today. I'm not going to go into the technologies, but websites that provide this information, a host of things. And increasingly, not just on the farm. We've got a lot of work right now looking at how we can save a lot of water between the farm and the consumer, all of that processing and packaging that gets the food ready to come to you. There's a lot of water used in that value chain. This is a facility on the UC Davis campus. Their goal is to actually be net zero on water. They're capturing rainwater. They're reusing it as much as 10 times before it's let go. And they're very close to it. And the building already is net zero energy. It's fully solar. So this is the kind, and the building houses a small but real scale winery, a brewery, and a tomato processing facility. And we've got real-time testing going on all that. Yes, I saw some people laugh. You can tell what we have our priorities on testing in California. The next report, though, got into something a little more controversial. The whole idea of how we store water and retain it. As many of you know, California has an amazing water storage system. We have literally engineered and plumbed almost the entire state with a series of dams and canal and water delivery mechanisms. And they've served us well, but at the same time, they have a lot of problems too. You heard someone earlier mention about silt behind the dams and a host of other issues. And in our ecosystem, where we have a fire ecosystem and rely upon snowpack, which is completely unlike here, the bigger, larger dams are a problem. So we've looked more at opportunities for groundwater storage, groundwater recharge, small, medium-scale dams off-stream so they're not doing damage to the fish and the salmon, and a host of other ways to help retain that water. And what's really crucial is when we do it and do it right, the Sierra and the Cascade mountain ranges in our state, which produce 60% of the water that California uses, are in very unhealthy state right now, those forested upper watersheds that are our snowpack. If we could get them in a healthier shape, we could actually have 9 to 16% more water off of most of those forested watersheds, and that's a big goal we're working towards. To do that, we did our third module. We discussed crisis to connectivity because we wanted to get past the fighting and the misconceptions and the complete lack of understanding that often happens between some of the interest groups. So we actually looked at 5 different areas of the state where they had been trying to do this type of work to find a larger scale, more comprehensive water management strategy. And with some success, a lot of lessons learned here. The report gives you those case studies and gives you lessons learned from each one. We then took that into Module 4 and we chose one of the 5 that was really doing some of the best work out there, the Kings River Basin, which gets some of its headwaters from Yosemite, and then down into including the floor of the San Joaquin Valley. So it's a really excellent example of the upper watershed down to the valley floor. A couple large urban areas, a lot of agriculture, a lot of very passionate stakeholders, many of whom have been fighting for years, and yet they've come around a lot of good solutions here that they're agreeing to now. Basically solutions on how to use the various watersheds. So along with that, we're trying to find better tools that will enable us to utilize this kind of information and implement it and still get more multi-purpose out of the money we're investing. This is a favorite example of mine from the Sacramento region, 6 counties, where they did a very different sort of GIS, Geographic Information System mapping, where they really mapped the crops and the cropping patterns on these 6 counties. 6 counties, 22 cities, about 85% of it is agriculture, large area. So they've got a ton of information that goes into this computer modeling system that isn't just the maps. What they've woven into it is econometric modeling. So they can then take the information from these maps on return on investment, water, labor, truck trips, and a host of other information, and give real-time answers to very real questions to help local government with planning, but also to help a farmer put together the information for a business plan that he or she might need to take to the bank to get a loan to process some of their crop. So to give you an example, if you've got a crop right now, let's say alfalfa that's got a value of $2 million, and you're shifting to plums, well, your return on plums is actually going to go up about $500,000, so that's a good thing. But on the other hand, and another good thing, you're going to use less water. Plums use less water than alfalfa does. But it takes more workers. So where are you going to get those workers? Labor is a huge issue for agriculture right now. Where are you going to get them? Where are they going to live? And you're going to have a lot more truck trips. And in addition to that, if you're planting trees like plums, you've hardened that water use. You can't let trees go fallow for a year like you can annual crops. So when you take this, and you can even take it further, when we're looking at things like farm to fork, doing more processing, because there's a lot of jobs and economic activity there, we can use this type of effort to say, okay, if we want to put in a processing plant, where is there adequate water for that plant? Where is there adequate wastewater treatment? And where should we locate it so that it minimizes truck trips, i.e. pollution? We're trying to reduce that. And it really lets us look at all the factors that are affecting the system. Utilizing that kind of information, we've just recently embarked upon larger comprehensive plans to really tie economic development to all of the things we're doing with agriculture and our water use. I'm really pleased to show off this particular project, Central Valley Ag Plus. It's something we submitted to the White House a couple months ago for a designation as a manufacturing hub. And I'm pleased to say we just got the designation from President Obama a few weeks ago. This is officially the very first farm-to-fork grocery manufacturing hub in the U.S. that's been recognized by the White House as part of their manufacturing initiative. So what they've done in this proposal is really bring together workforce, suppliers, capital, infrastructure, markets, research, bring all the pieces together in a comprehensive fashion so that we're helping the economy, we're making sure the infrastructure is there, and believe me, a big chunk of that infrastructure is around water. Both water to the crops, water for processing, wastewater treatment, water quality, all of the above. We're also trying to take advantage of another thing that President Obama did with his executive order requiring our federal agencies and their contractors to purchase bio-based products to the degree possible. This is something that's going to help us get a lot of biomass out of those forests so that we can then try to reduce our fires, improve wildlife habitat, improve recreation for humans, and get that 9 to 15% more water that could be produced off those healthier forests. Part of this in trying to build bridges so that we could get public support for all of these activities is our state economic summit. California Economic Summit, which we've had for the last 5 years now. Just the last time, myself and others were able to convince the leadership that we needed a working landscapes action team. And you can see this is very broad-based. Agriculture, forests, fisheries, mining, watersheds, energy, recreation, and habitat. Anything that's working on those rural external landscapes. And it's huge. We managed to get some studies done that show that right now on those landscapes, we've got 1.2 million jobs in California tied to our state's working landscapes. Right now, there's at least $318 billion in direct sales, and frankly, that number should be much higher because they did not count much of the recreation that goes on those working rural landscapes. But even so, if you use a conservative multiplier on that, our working landscapes are almost $1 trillion of the state's economy. Now, when you're able to point that out to policymakers and the urban public and the financial and economic development communities, they start paying attention. And we want them to, because if we could start being smarter and implement more fully our strategies, we have the potential to create over 270,000 jobs in this arena in the next 5 years, a goal that myself and many others are after. To do that, we obviously are going to need new technologies. We're working very closely with both the public sector, the government sector, the university, and the private sector to pursue those. The University of California system I represent and work with now for 2 whole weeks, I just started this job 2 weeks ago when I left USDA, is a statewide organization of 10 campuses, 10 research experiment stations, and every single community, every single county has extension personnel. People whose jobs are to take the newest information from the university and make sure it gets into the hands of the farmers and the ranchers and the public so that they can then take advantage of that and do a better job. Along with that, though, is the need for specific information. So we also have some statewide institutes on things like ag issues and ag policy issues, integrated pest management, nutrition. And one of them, the one that is very important right now because of the drought, is our California Institute for Water Resources. I encourage you to go to that website and look through all the materials that are there. You'll see a lot of great reports, as well as links to other places that are doing some really excellent work too. Last but not least, money. Everything I'm talking about takes money to do, to implement, to make happen. Again, information. Information is our friend. We managed to get a study done showing that investments made in rural areas, rural industries, have just as good a performance as metropolitan high-tech investments. People don't believe that, but the numbers don't lie. We've been trying to get the investment industry, the venture capitalists, the economic development world to understand there's a partnership between urban and rural that benefits both if we build the right kind of partnership and collaboration. To do that, specific to water, we've just recently in California created some new ways to finance water, both small projects as well as very large projects. Some new types of tax increment financing that let a homeowner or a business get a facility or a system, like say a on-demand or a gray water system installed in their house right now, but then they pay it off a little bit over 20 years in their property taxes. So it's actually a win-win for them because they get the right local property taxes against federal taxes. So we're kind of stealing from the federal government, but it's okay. They know that. They haven't hollered too loudly yet. Our cap and trade funds, you may have heard, California is the only state in the union that is now doing cap and trade to fight climate change. And those funds are going to be available to help with these issues too, as well as a new type of financing district. We're also hopeful that Congress is going to pass the new qualified public infrastructure bond that would let communities and cities actually do a new type of bonding that is very beneficial for them to put in new water infrastructure. For our drought, one of the things we're most interested in is the ability to capture the highly treated reclaimed water and make that available for landscaping and irrigation where it's appropriate. So last but not least, we know that it takes a lot of money to do this, so we're looking at layering all these different funds. So if we can do the economic activity, such as the bio-based products, that'll help, but it might not be enough. So then we augment with cap and trade credits, and then we're also starting to move into monetizing ecosystem services, so that, for example, the folks in the city that are getting water from the upper watersheds, if it was healthier, they'd get more water, they can help us pay for that. We're creating those mechanisms. So in closing, let me just say, I think we've got some exciting things going on. I look forward to your questions. But the bottom line is none of this works unless we get all of the partners working together. The government sector, the academic sector, the private industry, the financial, the research, all of this working together is how we're finding some solutions. Thank you. Obrigado.